Hi, and welcome everyone to Whole Soul School and Foundation's second Fireside Chats for August 2019. My name is Marie Mohler, and I am an author, intuitive, and co-founder of Whole Soul School and Foundation. I'm here with my co-host and co-founder, Lacy Frazer, who is a clinical psychologist by training and a practicing life and leadership coach and consultant today. We welcome our listeners joining us for our second edition of Fireside Chats for August 2019, continuing our conversations, Lacy, about the journey of personal transformation as we discuss the intersection, convergence, and interconnectedness of science and spirituality. In this episode, we are going to be discussing the film, The Living Matrix. Several researchers and scientists reveal some of the scientific theories behind alternative healing methods, and they offer their perspectives on how these important concepts may shift the future of healthcare. They share a variety of factors that contribute to our experience of well-being or the lack thereof, and they discuss the quantum physics behind the human body field, heart coherence, and information medicine. We aim to share several key insights and perspectives in our conversation today with our listeners. So without further ado, Lacy, welcome to the conversation today.
Good morning, Marie. I'm so happy to be here again. And these conversations, I think, are so important to me and my heart and my continued spiritual journey. So thank you. I love doing this with you. I'd like to say to our listeners that as Marie already stated, that we're talking about the convergence of science and spirituality. And we thought, while there were sort of many films we could have chosen for today's illustration of this larger and challenging topic, I think the movie The Living Matrix is one of the best that we could have chosen. Basically because it is an illustration of this intersection of science and spirituality with respect to the field of medicine and healing. You know, and so much of our medical community, our Western medicine, allopathic medicine, really focuses on the biology and chemistry of the body, and the belief that it's biology and chemistry that promotes healing. And while that is a part of it, there is also of movement towards the role of belief in healing, and how that impacts our bodies, how our thoughts and our belief system can help us heal ourselves. So the premise of this film really is about how disease comes from the play of our energy fields and thought patterns rather than genetic and or biological and or chemical malfunctions in the body. And really that we are often capable of self-healing without standard medical and biological interventions such as surgery or drugs. So, kind of in short, the scientists and practitioners in the film talk about that we have this energy field, which we've talked about here at Whole Soul School and Foundation. This is a quantum field that is alive, that is interactive.
It's a living energy.
It's a living energy that is constantly interacting with the cells of our body, our mind, all aspects of ourselves. So this idea, of course, flies in the face of modern allopathic medicine and what most of us have grown up believing, because such ideas, for some people, seem a little bit airy-fairy and it's easy to dismiss, mainly because we need a lot of proof and reliability and replicability and things like that. That's what we've been raised in. So
Right.
when we look at things or study things that we cannot see, that appear invisible, we're less likely to take them in as truth, and we're more apt to dismiss them.
Well, and we're conditioned to need that proof, right? We're conditioned to need that proof to believe something that it can be replicatable. And that gets into that whole idea of like the science versus faith, or the science versus spirituality.
Right. So the scientists and the speakers and the philosophers and the people who participate in this particular film are really kind of at the forefront of this emerging paradigm in our understanding of health. Much of it coming from this field of quantum physics and quantum mechanics. The idea that biology is controlled by the flow of information in energy fields, energy fields that exist outside of the physical visible body, that genes can be switched on and off by these information fields. These are ideas that are challenging conventional medicine, right? And are yes, they're controversial and uncomfortable for some people. But more and more we are hearing stories about miraculous healings that just don't seem possible. Doctors can't explain how this could have happened.
Yes,
right?
Exactly.
So the film really sort of looks at this, and it challenges our scientific basis for Western medicine.
Yeah. Well, what I'd like to do now, Lacy, is I'm going to give a little summary of how the film opens. It opens with the story of a little boy named Dimitri who has cerebral palsy. And his parents have exhausted all traditional and allopathic medical options for improving his condition and his symptoms. They find their way to Eric Pearl, who's a doctor of chiropractic medicine, I believe, who practices something called reconnective healing. He basically uses his hands and heals other people by working with the energy field and not touching the body. Symptoms of cerebral palsy diminished for Dimitri, and he begins to lead more of a normal life.
And just by not even, no physical manipulation of the body, no tests, no medicines, right?
No surgeries, right? This is you see him in the film moving energy somehow with his hands around Dimitri. And that first session alone helped Dimitri. I think he walked better. And after a second session, maybe Dimitri might have had, I think his fist was closed tight, something like that, and he couldn't open his fist. And after another session with Dr. Pearl, his fist opened. And so the parents were seeing that something was healing their son, right? That they couldn't explain, but the healing was there.
Right.
And so...
And there are many, many cases and books written about this, and Reiki's a little bit like that. And we'll talk about different kinds of energy medicines as we go along here. But it was a really compelling story.
Yeah. And so I just wanted to say that these amazing healings take place all the time, but the medical field has no explanation for these healings.
Right.
It's still falling short to find an explanation really for why these healings are occurring without traditional medicine or medical intervention.
Right.
Yeah, it's powerful.
Yeah.
And it's exciting. It's exciting.
Very exciting.
It speaks to a larger energy.
Yeah.
In the world we live in.
Yeah. I mean, you can't ignore this stuff anymore. As much as your logical human brain wants to dismiss it, there are too many stories now of healing the body through managing and manipulating this energy field, in a lot of different ways.
Yeah, definitely. And we can't disregard the fact that modern medicine is also falling short in many cases now because there are so many expressions of disease that medicine just doesn't understand, and it doesn't know how to heal and how to remedy.
Right.
And so just like our own family, when modern medicine couldn't solve the issues or the problems that we were facing, you start seeking other alternatives.
Right.
That creates a natural path of inquiry and curiosity, and you steadily find a way to finding more of the answers that you need, and oftentimes it leads you somewhere into this field of energy work.
Yeah.
So one of the prominent voices in this film is Lynn McTaggart. I love her. She's just so great at explaining some of these complex concepts in a way that a lot of people can understand. And she comes in and she reminds us of the Newtonian science, where Newton created a clockwork model, where mind is separate from body and we are separate from each other. These early scientists anchored the science of separation. This created a fundamental shift whereby separation became the foundation of Western thinking. Whereas virtually, Lacy, before Newton and Descartes come onto the scene, in all ancient and native cultures before that, it was understood that the universe is a circle and has unity, and that man exists in the center of that circle and that unity. So before Newton and Descartes, there was an understanding of life as a whole, and that man existed in a unified field. Newtonian thinking involved believing that we exist in a well-behaved universe of separate things, and believe that our bodies are a well-behaved machine consisting of a heart, a brain, and different parts that are all conducted by DNA.
You know, Marie, I every time I sort of feel into this explanation or this notion that ancient cultures and the people that came way in the indigenous cultures and
way
before the science that we know now, in this concept of unity, that man existed within a unified field. The example I always give, and I may have said this on a previous podcast, but the vision that I always have and the example I always give in class when I'm teaching some of this stuff is the concept of the fish in the water. You know, that a fish swims through this vast ocean and the water is flowing through his gills, and that's what gives that fish life force. Without the water flowing through its body, it couldn't live, it couldn't survive, because we know when you take the fish out of water, it dies. So when you really feel that, I mean, I even close my eyes and I feel that fish swimming in the water with that water flowing through its gills, and it is part of the fish. It is, it is one with the fish. And then I sort of ask the question, well, where does the fish end and the water begin? And the truth is that they really are one. One can't exist without the other. And I always envision us as human beings in the same way. That we are electromagnetic beings, that we have energy flowing through us all the time, constantly. It's what powers us, literally. So as we walk through this energy field, and energy is coursing through our bodies at all times, and it is providing the power for the neurology of our brain and the pumping of our heart and the creation of emotion, where do we end and the universe begin? We really don't. We are one. And I think in a way, that's what this concept of the unified quantum field is all about. Is this movement towards understanding that we exist within this very, very powerful energetic matrix of energy, and without it, we couldn't exist. So it's so fascinating to me that our medicine and so much of our discipline on as humans and in our culture is about, it promotes separation between people, competition, things like that, because we're really not separate. We all exist within this field. We all have our own field, and then all our fields exist within the larger field.
Right.
And energy medicine is really starting to show this and prove this, that we can work with the energy field to help heal the body.
Yeah.
So I just like to jump in with that there as a kind of exclamation point.
Well, and that the ancients knew this.
Yes.
Even without all of this science, they knew how the universe worked.
Right.
Because they could feel it. They were a part of that living matrix. They were a part of the oneness.
Right.
And then when you have scientists who are well-meaning and are trying to study and understand how life works, we sometimes get theories that, can create centuries of an alternative consciousness that may or may not benefit humanity and the planet as a whole. And in a way, this separated consciousness, this separated model, what did they call it? The Clockwork Model, where we're a series of individuals separated, in some ways non-communicating parts, is how, look at our fields, Lacy, of medicine, of education, right? Of the financial industry, of just even the family unit. We become more and more separated from each other, even though we have more and more technology. Right? And there's just this, we keep living out this model of separation in many ways on the planet. And I think we need to come back a little bit more to this quantum field, what the ancients knew, that life is a circle, that all living beings are part of a circle of wholeness and unity. And that is the driving force of the universe.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, I think of the term New Thought, Ancient Wisdom movement.
Yeah.
And I've always tried to, I kind of say that that's what I follow. If people ask me, you know, what religion or what, you know, they try to put me in a category, and I sort of always say, well, you know, I'm just part of the New Thought, Ancient Wisdom movement. And that's what you're talking about.
It's
you know?
both. It's like, progressing and evolving from the consciousness that exists today, and also pulling and drawing from things that we knew well before. A lot of our history books teach us about, science and new discoveries that they had.
Right. And you know, my limited research in kind of the progression of how this happened was really during the kind of between the 1870s and the 1920s was when biochemistry sort of came on the scene and became really, really prominent. And a lot of those findings were correct in the short term, but a split occurred kind of right at this point, and some followed the clockwork universe, Newtonian physics sort of theory, where everything is a series of separate parts put together, proposed by Newton. And then in sort of the early 20s, quantum physics started to come on the scene. And there were people who took that fork in the road. Instead, they started to pay attention to the things that maybe could not be visibly seen or proven. And they started to understand that there was a lot more in the unseen that wasn't being looked at. And in fact, Bruce Lipton, he talks about that, and he says, in the Newtonian belief of a material world, we focus on matter and we don't pay attention to all the other stuff, all the other variables, the unseen that is impacting our bodies and all of our experiences. Right? And that's what we're talking about here. The unseen is the quantum field. And there is more and more proof that not only does the field exist, but it has a very prominent and deep impact on our physical health.
Definitely.
Well,
yeah, were you going to talk about that? We were going to talk about the modality of science where we have the EEG and something he called the MEG. Did you want to talk a little bit about that?
Well, yeah, I mean, the MEG, magnetocephalography.
Magnetoencephalography.
Oh, thank you. What she said, we'll just call it the MEG scan, is an imaging technique that identifies brain activity and measures small magnetic fields produced in the brain. So it reads the fields of neurological activity without even touching the body or the brain.
And I think what's even more important to shorten that is it reads the fields.
Yes.
It's not touching and reading the brain itself.
Yes.
It's reading the fields of the brain and around the brain.
Yes, and it reminds me of the EEG, which is what the EEG reads the same kind of thing with electrodes, I believe, and it's measuring the electrical activity of the brain. And the electrocardiogram reads the magnetic activity of the heart. So,
we're reading fields.
Right.
Science isn't, and medicine may not be announcing this to the general public per se, but if you really think about these modalities and these scans, Lacy, they are actually reading the field to get more information that they otherwise can't. Right,
exactly. So, quantum physics began to really change our perceptions 80 years ago. In the field of science, and medicine really is not completely caught up yet.
Yeah.
So today's field of medicine is really still based on this Newtonian model, this clockwork universe, which is sort of this reductionist model based on quantum bits and pieces, that we are all a machine that works on physics and chemistry alone. And modern medicine follows suit, following the belief that enzymes and hormones are what control our systems. But modern physics has virtually eliminated this Newtonian model, saying it is not matter, but rather the mind or the spirit that is primary. And even further, not just defined as spirit, but intelligent energy fields. Yes. So here's our intersection, right? Here's our convergence.
Right.
So the new viewpoint has yet to really be incorporated into the medical model, but boy, it feels so good that we're moving in that direction. And there are many people that are talking about this now, and I love, I'm not a scientist. I'm not a quantum physicist. but I am a spiritualist, and I love knowing that my spirituality does have some science woven in. I don't separate it out.
They're part of the whole.
It's a part of the whole. It exists.
You have to have one with the other.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah, and I just wanted to say also, I think too that people's level of seeking is summoning this larger conversation. So in the past, I don't know exactly when Newton developed his Clockwork Model, but it's in the last 100 or 200 years, I'm guessing. So, and for that amount of time, we've been functioning off this premise and this belief in separation, because that's what people embraced when they embraced the Newtonian model. But as I continue to say, as more people continue to find that in some ways, modern medicine is not meeting their needs and solving the health crises that they're facing and dealing with, it makes them seek alternatives. And usually that alternative is moving out into the field of energy medicine.
Well, and I want to just say, you said something really powerful, which is it's the questioning that brings these new thoughts and ideas to us. And how does that work? It works through the quantum field.
Right.
Right? Because it's what we think and it's what we believe and it's what we put out there into the field that gets magnetized, that is electrified, that pulls to us the answers to our questions in some way, shape, or form.
Right.
And you and I have a million stories about how that works.
Right. Right. We talked about that some in the visioning and manifesting podcast that we did. But even in this, so it relates to this conversation of science and spirituality. And when, if you have some kind of health issue that's creating some version of unpleasantness or challenge or fear, or, in some way not living the health that you are designed to be, you're going to keep seeking out answers. And when you exhaust the medical field and you absolutely exhaust every avenue that someone could give you an answer, most people don't stop seeking because their discomfort calls them to continue to search for, a solution and a remedy to what they're dealing with. And so that's, I think, when you move into the energy medicine, we'll talk about some of those modalities towards the end here, but when you move into energy medicine, it's energy that is working with your body's field, and it's also based on faith. There's a lot of belief in, there's a lot of belief and intention involved in the healing that takes place, but miraculously, a lot of people are getting results. And that can't be ignored. At this point, in some ways, some people who follow a strictly Newtonian model might try and ignore those and just say that they're outlier anomalies. But in fact, in some ways on our planet, with the amount of dis-ease that's going on, it is almost becoming the norm that, some of these energy medicines and the healing successes that we're seeing is becoming more of the norm. And I think humanity as a whole has to begin to take a look at that. So I think this is a good point in the conversation to look at the role of intentions and belief in healing. The Living Matrix puts a spotlight on the role of intentions.
Yeah.
And I wanted to bring up something that Wayne Dyer once said. It's that a belief is just a thought that you keep thinking. So if you think a particular thought over and over, it becomes a belief. Intention, in my view, is a purposeful belief, which has the power in the quantum field to create the change we often desire. So in this way, we can look at the fact that healing from this perspective, looking at the role of intentions in healing, depends on your intention. It depends on what that purposeful belief is, right? And in this film, they're talking about some scientific evidence that supports it is the belief and the intention that is creating the healing.
And I always imagine, just Marie, as you're saying that, I'm a very visual person, and I see all the pictures that I've seen in depictions of the human body, and then this, massive energy field that goes 8 to 12 feet out from your body. And within that energy field, I see just all of these just sort of electrical waves of energy. And my thoughts that I put down into that field, if they are intentional beliefs about healing, are kind of getting alchemized in that field, and they're then impacting my body. So if I believe in, if I believe in that I can heal myself over time, I will have that intention will be working in the quantum field to influence my body. And that's just kind of the visual I had when you were saying
and
that.
that's the positive of that. That's the positive energy.
Right.
If you believe that your body can heal, everything aligns in your body's chemical processes and how your system functions to align with that belief. And the converse is true. If you go to see a number of doctors that say, I'm sorry, there's nothing more that we know to do for you, to help you with whatever this issue is, you might start believing in the model of disease. And then your energy field, does all the things that it does with the field, and it starts to create that experience in your body.
Yeah, you hear all the stories about people that are given 6 months to live or 3 weeks to live, and they live 10 more years. Right. And I mean, I had a grandmother who had been diagnosed with cancer, who was given a very short period of time to live. And she in no way, in any fiber of her being, believed that she was going to die in that short period of time. And you could feel it in everything about her. And she went on, she lived as if it never existed in her body.
But there was no cancer.
She traveled around the world and she did everything she wanted to do. And she lived a life that wasn't consistent with somebody living with cancer.
Yeah.
She
lived beyond that information that had been given to her.
Yeah.
And she continued on believing that her body could heal itself, that she'd find a solution. And she just continued living, in all the ways that she'd enjoyed previously.
Right.
And I think that extended her life in many ways. Versus, had she accepted the belief that she was sick and she had really taken that in deep down, I think that her life might have been a little bit shorter and we would have had less time with her.
Yes.
She was a lovely human being.
Yeah.
So I want to get back to talking about, we're talking about the role of intentions and belief in healing. And in this film, they're sharing that a thought is an actual physical energy. Our thoughts influence our performance and our lives and our lifestyles. And I think it's Lynn McTaggart that says this. She talks about the key to healing, no matter what the modality is. It's the belief that is the most critical factor. The belief itself is the body's strongest medicine. I love when they say this. I find it to be so true.
So powerful.
It's so powerful. So I'm going to say it again. The belief itself is the body's strongest medicine. Many studies support this. So a lot of the studies are set up where a portion of the subjects receive the treatment, whatever the medical treatment is, and a portion of the subjects don't receive any treatment at all, or they are given a placebo. And what they find is that all subjects get better, right? And that the body can't distinguish between action and thought.
Yeah, Marie, this reminds me so much. I think we talked about it a little bit on our previous podcast, but the concept of, visual motor rehearsal, that's where this comes in. We are able to visualize in our mind, making the final basket in the basketball game, or hitting the home run, or making the hole in one, or having our business, turn into a great success. Whatever it is, we can
use the power of
thought and our visualization to create the reality that we want. And how that happens, the mechanism through which that works, is through the quantum field. It's really our intention and our belief,
right,
and the visualization that then brings about what it is we are seeking. And science is starting to show that our bodies can't distinguish between actually doing something and the thought of doing it. And they use visual motor rehearsal for the astronauts at NASA. They put them in all of these simulations, and that helps them visualize what potentially could happen. Or pro athletes, they are envisioning the muscles firing in a certain way. They're envisioning...
they can run the whole race in their mind.
Exactly. Thank you. They can run the whole race in their mind, and it's done, and they've won, and they've got victory. And
the body can't tell the difference.
Whether it actually did it.
Whether they actually ran that race, or whether they were just believing and thinking that they did.
Right.
It's the same thing to the field, and the field is always listening, which is trying to churn out the experience that you're thinking about.
Right.
Right? So, in keeping with this conversation about the power of belief and the power of our thoughts, Bruce Lipton in The Living Matrix says that a belief a person has overrides their biology.
Wow. I mean, that flies in the face of so much of what we've been taught.
It's amazing. And it's much of what you talk about with your grandmother. And, Bruce Lipton goes on to say that 1/3 of all healings has nothing to do with the process. It has to do with the belief and the placebo effect. 1/3 of all patients will heal just because they believe in it. So this suggests there is something more than just science unfolding here. And he goes on to talk about the fact that no one is focusing on the placebo effect in medical school in this concept of how is it healing, right? We know that the placebo effect exists in medicine, but there isn't this strong pursuit of trying to understand why is it so effective.
Because, if we did, think about how people could be taught differently in medical school, and people could be taught self-healing techniques,
Exactly. We might need medicines less,
right,
and feel more empowered as living beings, working with the living energy of the universe to heal our bodies. And we're not saying on this podcast that there isn't a place for modern medicine. There are many times that modern medicine is a tremendous gift, and it can be life-saving. But as a consciousness, as a system of belief that many of us in the human collective take on because of this Newtonian model that we're still all living from, right? Many of us we've been conditioned into that model, and we still think this way. It would be so liberating for us if we could understand that we can participate with the field and even correct minor symptoms or minor aspects or symptoms of disease earlier on, if we didn't think that we were going to, always have to go to the doctor to fix whatever's not working.
Or take the pill or have the surgery.
We're conditioned into the culture that it's medicine that fixes us, and medicine is Newtonian medicine. Right? And so this is really powerful that Bruce Lipton is talking about 1/3 of all healings has nothing to do with the process or the medical modality. It has to do with the placebo and that placebo effect. And he talked about, as I said, no one's focusing on the placebo effect in medical school of how is it healing? How is it having this kind of impact? What are the other things affecting and impacting healing other than physics and chemistry? And Bruce Lipton says, it seems time to shift our focus onto the placebo effect and what creates this and what this inert substance is. And he goes on to talk about, and he defines the placebo effect as it's an effect that comes from energy fields. It's a self-healing technique, a version of belief and intention.
Right. So, we have a lot that we could cover today in this podcast and related to this movie. And one of the things that the movie does well that we may not have time to discuss fully are different modalities and different ways that we could actually work with the energy field. And one of my favorite, and actually I don't know that I'd say favorite, but one of the things that I'd like to know more about, actually, because I don't know a lot about it, but I believe in its power, is neuro-linguistic programming, NLP. And Ariel Essex discusses this in this film. And neuro-linguistic programming is the neuro part refers to obviously our neurology, linguistic refers to language, and programming refers to how that neural language functions. So in other words, learning NLP is like learning the language of your mind, and a lot of people, and this woman, Ariel Essex, talks in the movie about actually healing a brain tumor through the techniques of NLP. I'm going to bring us back again here to Bruce Lipton a little bit, because as we're talking about different techniques and approaches to working with the energy field, Bruce Lipton was very involved, and currently I think is still involved, in something called epigenetics, and it's really the study of genes. And what his work has really shown is, and this is going to be very surprising, that genes are not really controlling our biology, that it's perceptions, beliefs, and attitudes that shape the biology.
It's profound. It is a profound shift.
It really is. And, there's a lot of bullet points we could talk about what he found in his work. One of the most prominent being that the information inside the cell that turns the cell on is actually outside the cell.
Wow.
Okay. That the gene is subordinate to the outside information, right? Which when we say outside information, we're really talking about the field.
It's the field.
The gene is a blueprint that the environment around the gene makes the greatest impact on, right? So he talks about the unlimited potential that we really do have, that our human body has, and that we have as humans functioning in this world because of this field. He also talks a little bit about energy cardiology, and that all cells are receiving signals from the heart through the circulatory system. So, this is a good segue now into the concept of coherence, which is studied by the HeartMath Institute. And coherence, HeartMath studies the coherent rhythm of the heart, right? Which syncs the whole body up.
Yes.
Through energy.
Right.
And the heart, information goes from the heart to the brain, to then the body, to then the consciousness. The heart is connected to this field that we're talking so much about. And the HeartMath is also discovering that there's a lot of neural tissue in the heart. So there's
a heart brain.
So there's a heart brain, right?
There's wisdom in our heart centers.
Right.
It's amazing.
Absolutely.
One of the speakers in this film talks about the heart being the emperor of the whole system.
Yeah. When I teach it, I often say that the heart is the generator. It's the generator of the whole system.
Yes. It's the guidance system of our entire life experience. And it's these conversations and the time we're in, where science and spirituality do need to come back together, is helping us remember that our consciousness and our information and the wisdom that we have is really coming through our hearts and informing our brains, that then inform our bodies, that then create our consciousness.
Yeah. So when we, when I look back at, the work of Bruce Lipton and Lynn McTaggart and the work around the concept of coherence and NLP and HeartMath, it really makes me think a lot about the fact that, traditional medicine thinks and treats the body as having all the answers. But what's really being discovered is that the field has all the answers. The field has the information that the body needs to heal.
Right.
And we kind of have had it a little backwards. I mean, I know that's a bold statement, and I know that I'm not any of these people, and I'm not any kind of scientist, but I do believe in it. I probably believe in it so much because we've had our own experiences to show it to be true, at least for us.
Yes.
So I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about the concept of informational medicine.
Well, before I get to informational medicine, I just wanted to, maybe we're going to talk about that just a little bit later, but I wanted to bring up that whole concept of we're an information system accessing information from the field, and acupuncture is a good example of that.
Yes.
Right. And it works on the meridians in the body.
Right.
That sends this information energetically through our system, through the meridians in the body. And so for anybody that's had acupuncture that's listening to this call, that's just one of many modalities that are operating from this underlying assumption that there's a field informing our health, wellness, and well-being.
Right.
And so, yes, they bring up this concept of informational medicine, and I hadn't heard that except for through this film.
Right.
So they were talking about informational medicine is the future of medicine, whereby the control system of the body is the information. It is the belief that to heal, we need to correct any distortions of information in the body field. Dis-ease from this lens, Lacy, is distorted information in the body.
Right.
So I think we're going to be having an evolution in the field of science and medicine in the coming years, where at least more of this is being explored and people are talking about it more and more, because the field is definitely influencing the healing that many people experience and many people desire.
Well, and I don't know that it's even influencing feels like a small word. Like I think it really is
the control center.
The control center, and
Yeah.
I think that there is some new testing out there, and there's new theories, and there's new modalities that are being discovered every day that look at the distortions in the biofield, in this quantum field, in this energy field. And we're really, I think, on the threshold as a humanity and as a scientific community, as a medical community, to understanding that this field so much more and that it contains so much information. I mean,
like a super internet.
Right. Yeah.
That we can all access, and we don't have to know all the facts, but when we go seeking and we need that information, we can access it in the field. Like many of us go to the internet when we don't know about something. Like we had to look up some of these testings and some of these scans. Where do we go?
Right.
We went to the internet.
Right.
And so this is kind of our consciousnesses and our body's ability to access this cosmic, this more consciousness internet that has more of the answers that many are seeking.
Yeah, and I think it's a really exciting time to be alive because of the new frontier, and that we are all sort of these new thought leaders now that are emerging and actually being heard and that have a voice in different ways. And that's really why we created Whole Soul School and Foundation as a platform to share these messages, and hoping that people will something will ignite within each of us, to help us awaken to these new ideas and these new forms of healing.
Yeah. Well, and to create a field of energy all our own around Whole Soul School and Foundation, that when people tap into the conversations that we have here, they're tapping into a field of awareness that they might not find on a different station, on a different channel, on a different website. So I didn't know if you fully mentioned that, but with the NES testing, right, there are some modalities that are looking at these distortions in the field with the hopes of correcting those distortions, right? That's the goal. So there's NES testing, and I think another one they mentioned was thought field therapy, which is an energy psychology. So, there's a lot of wealth of information in this film. We can all just sort of extract what we resonate with and what we're seeking. It's definitely worth looking at and going to their website. But in the end, towards the end of this film, they talk about that healthcare is in a crisis. It is a crisis of our models, right? It's, we've got the Newtonian science versus the quantum mechanics version of science that is bringing us closer to that intersection of science and spirituality, where the Newtonian physics and Newtonian science would tell us that everything must be kept separate. And if we just look at our world, we have to look at how is that separation model really working for us? Is everybody on the planet fed? Is everybody on the planet living in wellness and prosperity? Right? Are we like the epitome of health on this planet? Are the oceans healthy? Is the air quality healthy? Right?
No.
So, right, you can the financial system's healthy, right? We can look at all these models and say, if that model is really fabulous, then everybody should look and feel fabulous
and be thriving.
But if 7 billion people aren't looking and feeling fabulous, we have to look at least something is underlying what's happening here, and maybe we need a different model.
Right.
Or maybe we need to explore how we can hybridize some of the models that we have. So anyway, they make the point that healthcare is in a crisis, and it's a crisis of our models. He talks about, I think it was Bruce Lipton maybe, that we have a war on cancer. It's a warfare model. Well, we know that we have a lot of, examples of warfare just between countries on this planet, let alone having a war on our cells or a war on some, dis-ease in our bodies. And so we need to foster a revolution now. We need to move from a disease-centered orientation to a healing-centered orientation.
Yes, and I think we're seeing that, Marie, today. I mean, when you look around and you see a lot of wellness centers. We're not calling them crisis centers as much anymore. We're calling them wellness centers.
Yeah.
And when we go to the doctor, we go to our doctor for our wellness exam.
Right, our well checks.
Our well checks rather than our,
sick checks.
Sick checks, right? Exactly.
And no, it's so important. And in that same vein, Lacy, that they're really saying that we do have a medical revolution on our hands. They reference, if you have further questions about some of the things that we just barely scratched the surface on today, you can go and watch the film, and you can go to their website that might actually have more information there. It's www.livingmatrixmovie.com, and I'll put that in the description section of the video or the podcast. But a closing thought of the film was that healing is where we must correct the human body field so that it works in alignment with the original blueprint. I'm going to say that again. Healing is where we must correct the human body field so that it works in alignment with the original blueprint. Our bodies do know how to heal themselves. We're just beginning to be on our way back to what the ancients always knew. The native indigenous cultures always knew how to restore and reset the perfection of that original blueprint in the body field, right?
Right.
And so I think we've had a model that is quickly getting outdated and antiquated in some ways, while science and technology is having greater advancements by the day. We're understanding less the connection and intersection between science and spirituality and our bodies in the field. And if we're not having conversations about how those two things work together, and we keep trying to isolate them out and separate them out, our experience is more dis-ease and more toxicity on the planet. And health and healing come back into play when we start viewing things the way the ancients did, which is life is a circle. Life is a whole. We're all part of a greater unity. And when we find our place in that, and when we find our consciousness returning to that, our world begins to line up with what looks like unity and a sphere and a wholeness that's peaceful and easier and kind and compassionate and collaborative. When you have these separated parts that function like a machine and a clock, you've taken like the soul out of the human presence and all sentient life here. And that's why, we have this crisis of health and this crisis of consciousness. I mean, I'm going to say it's a crisis of consciousness on the planet, even more than sort of a crisis in our models. This was just one example of where the crisis is showing up.
Right.
So we are being summoned back into this greater awareness and this greater wholeness. And that's part of what our messages are here at Whole Soul School and Foundation. So I didn't know if you were going to list any alternative medicines, I think
modalities. We're in the interest of time. It was funny, I Googled energy medicine. I mean, I'm familiar with a lot of different modalities just from our experience, but I Googled it to see if I could get a concise list. And the first list that came up was over 30 pages long.
Wow.
So I think that just that tells you that there's a lot going on out there that a lot of people are not aware of.
Yeah.
So I would just encourage our listeners to simply Google energy medicine, and you can get an idea of the many, many modalities out there that people are using to heal the body that are not that don't follow the allopathic medicine track. And I want to also make sure that our listeners know that we are not anti-Western medicin.
It definitely has its place.
Exactly.
It has its place.
It has its place.
It's helped our family, and it's helped many people. And but I think that be like a one-stop shop. That's the only place to look for your health care and to look for your wellness and your system, your access of greater wellness and well-being. There's so much more out there, and that's the same metaphor for the field. Right. There's so much more accessible to us than our perception at this point as a collective consciousness, as a humanity, is letting into our field of awareness. But when we are willing to look beyond the physical body and just the separated parts, and we understand that there's a field of information that it's informing all those parts, we might want to start getting curious about understanding more of the field, which is what Bruce Lipton was talking about. Is, wouldn't you think that when there's a third of all healings happens from the placebo effect?
Right.
You'd think it would make us very curious about what's creating that placebo effect, and to look at that with a greater curiosity and intrigue and enthusiasm than we do right now.
Yes.
I think people who seek out alternative medicines in some ways today are looked at as a little woo-woo, or looked at as a little crazy, or looked at it, you're not following the rules.
Right.
But when the rules don't solve the questions that you have and the healing crises that you have, you start to access this greater field. And you might just find that greater field has the answers that you're actually seeking. So we want to thank all of our listeners for joining us today. This was a challenging topic to cover, science and spirituality, because it's just so vast. It's so vast. And we appreciate David Morgenstern, and I appreciate you, Lacy, joining me in this month's conversations. And also Sue Wells and I had a podcast on Mind, Body, Spirit Fitness podcast series talking about surfing the waves of the energies on the planet right now and in our daily lives. And so there was a lot of information that was offered through Whole Soul School and Foundation. If you're still listening to this podcast and you waded into the waters of science and spirituality with us, we appreciate your willingness and effort to ride the waves of this conversation with us. So we thank you very much. We're going to see you all again in September.
Look for us online at www.wholesoulschoolandfoundation.com. Our YouTube channel, Whole Soul School and Foundation.
wholesoulschoolandfoundation.org is our website.
Oh, I knew that, but .com will still get you there, I think, because I've made that mistake.
Okay, so anyway, but the correct one is wholesoulschoolandfoundation.org, and you can visit us on YouTube at Whole Soul School and Foundation. We're also on Instagram and we're on Twitter. I don't spend a whole lot of time on Twitter myself, but we are there. You can find us there, and we are on Facebook, where we post reminders for the soul twice a week. Just really beautiful doses of energy, always connected to the theme of what we're talking about here. So it's a lovely way to share with your friends and the people who are close to you who are on a similar journey, some of those inspirations. And we thank you for joining us and journeying with us. And we will continue the journey of personal transformation and the many insights that go with it next month in September. It's already September 2019.
Jeez.
So we send blessings to all of you, and we thank you for joining us, and we hope you have a wonderful weekend. Blessings.